Hi, everybody. My name is Tom Eichmans.
And I'm Jamie Yen, and we are the co-founders of the Seattle Art Book Fair, and we are thrilled to welcome you to the second weekend of Makeready, which is the first official program of the Seattle Art Book Fair.
Even though this is a virtual event, we'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that this event has been organized on the traditional territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and specifically the Duwamish tribe. We're grateful to and honor these communities past, present, and future.
The Seattle Art Book Fair was founded in 2019 with the expectations of launching our first fair in spring 2020, but we all know how that went. So while we wait for our in-person fair to take place next spring, save the date, we decided to put together Makeready, which is a 3-part virtual program that features artists, designers, printers, and publishers sharing the process of making an art book from start to finish. Each weekend has a distinct theme. Before a book, which was last weekend, making a book, which is this weekend, and after a book, which is next weekend. We hope folks come away from these sessions seeing books and publishing in a different way, excited to connect with other bookmakers, and are perhaps inspired to start new publishing projects of their own.
One question we hear a lot is, what exactly is an art book? There are a lot of answers to this question, and none of them are wrong. Art books are a broad category of publications by artists, designers, bookmakers that reflect on books as a medium and publishing as an artistic practice. Art books often combine content, form, and materials in thoughtful ways that push the possibilities of what books can even be. The artists, designers, printers, and publishers over this weekend and next and last weekend offer different ways to think about what falls under the very wide umbrella of art books and what you might see represented at an art book fair. So this weekend of making a book features tonight's conversation, which we're about to introduce, as well as a whole bunch more programming tomorrow on Saturday, including 4 studio visits, a workshop, and office hours at the end of the day. So be sure to check that out. And if you haven't got tickets for those yet, there's still time.
We also want to thank everybody, our volunteers, Shun Pike, through whom we are powered by, and the support that we get from For Culture, and also to all the individual donors who have donated to us directly through programs like Give Big. And we also want to thank our advisors, as well as to Short Run Comics and Arts Festival, which we hope will return soon. Thank you also to Julia Powers, who's here with us today, for her assistance over these next few weekends, as well as to Hart Boyd, who is moderating Discord for us tonight.
We wanted to take just a few minutes to talk about the actual logistics. So this session is being recorded and screen captured. So if you do not want to appear on video or in screenshots, please feel free to turn off your camera or change your display name. Please also be respectful of participants' work and time. Do not record or screenshot any session without notification or their consent. And please mute yourself while you're not speaking. Live captions are available, and I'm about to turn them on because they're very easy to forget to turn on. But there should be a button at the bottom of your Zoom with which you can also see them.
So yes, please save the date for the in-person Seattle Art Book Fair. It's going to return in spring 2020 at the historic Washington Hall. And also we're going to have some more exciting news to share this weekend and next, which Tom is going to talk about next.
Yeah, so we are excited to announce today that there's going to be a new event following Makeready, a Seattle Art Book Fair pop-up exhibit and a book sale at the gift shop in Chinatown International District. So this pop-up is going to feature books, zines, comics, and maybe some fundraiser editions for Seattle Art Book Fair. And it's going to be over the first weekend of June, the 5th and the 6th. We'll have more details about the time and what's going to be included, and are also excited to let you know that the gift shop is having an entire month's worth of pop-ups throughout June over under an umbrella just called Pages. So stay tuned for that.
So thank you everyone again for being here. Just a quick introductions to our moderator and panelists. So Robert Baxter, who is moderating this evening, is an independent designer, writer, bookmaker, and archivist. Also an instructor at Cornish. Jakelen Diaz is a studio manager at the Independent Publishing Resource Center in Portland, whose mission is to provide affordable access to space, tools, and resources for creating independently published media and artwork. Mimi Jaffe and Rain Sissel collaborate on Mundane Fantasy, a Seattle-based biennial publication that features narrative, poetry, and art comics of both emerging and established local artists. Lucas Reif and Austin White are the co-founders of Shelf, a Chicago-based publishing imprint and collaborative graphic design practice. Without further ado, Robert, off to you.
Awesome, thank you so much. First, I also want to say thank you to both Tom and Jamie and all of the panelists for being here, because this is quite exciting and such a good and wonderful event to see happening right now and to be a part of. So thank you, everyone. I'll be super brief on my own stuff. Yeah, so I teach design history at Cornish. My own time in publishing has been fairly short, on and off for a little while, and as a main thing for the past 2 years or so. I'm going to do a quick screen share and just run through some stuff, some quick links of resources that might be helpful. I don't know. I'd say like most of what my own personal practice is creating and managing educational resources to try to give greater design access to people. So I'll do a quick screen share and share out some of those things. I just posted links to all of these. So a friend of mine moved to Seattle not too long ago to teach and asked like, what are all the publishing things in Seattle? What are the resources? Where are things located? And I didn't have a great like go-to thing to send her. So I put together this little spreadsheet, which is public, and you all are welcome to like send me things to edit things and add things to it. It's a work in progress, but it's a bunch of all the printers and spaces I know of in Seattle, a list of the publishers and what sort of things they publish and how they publish, and bookstores. And I have to add humans to this. I have to add events now, especially that we have the Seattle Art Book Fair up and happening. But there's a link to that in the chat. The next thing is this tiny little publication. So I want to do a lot more stuff like this, but this is basically a how to teach yourself typography if you didn't have a formal typography program, or more specifically why this was made if you did and it wasn't great. So this is a little reading list of just like basic typography things. There's a link to the PDF version. And if you want a print version, hit me up. And then the last thing is, as an instructor, I try to make all of my syllabi publicly available. So this is a design history syllabus with all of the readings and mini lectures, etc., attached to it. But yeah, that's a little bit on me. And I'd say one of my major inspirations for doing all of these little things and trying to get access to resources going has been a visit I took to the IPRC a few years ago and a workshop that I did there. So I'll turn that over to Jakelen to talk about the IPRC.
Yes, it's my turn. Is this where I present? Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Jaffe. I'm the studio manager at the IPRC. We're located out in Portland, Oregon. Here I am. Does this look all right to everyone? Cool. Okay. So this is me just outside of our studio. We've moved around a bit over the years. I think we've had like 2 other locations prior to the space that we're in now, where I am. I'm sitting in our letterpress studio. And I've held several roles here at the IPRC. I moved to Portland from Southern California back in 2018. And I had just graduated college. I had studied graphic design, and I really wanted to get into publishing. Like that was the area that I was most excited about. So I think like when I moved here, I just kind of Googled like Portland publishing, publishers, you know, things like that. And that's how I came across the IPRC. I've been a student here, an instructor, volunteer, community member, and I'm here as staff. I joined the staff back in March, and it's been so great. it's such a lovely community space that I'm so grateful to be a part of. Here's some images from inside the studio. Basically, the IPRC exists to be to provide affordable access to resources, materials, and space to create work. People in here work on so many different things, you know, from art books and zines to poster prints and flyers. We have letterpress, screen printing, and risograph available in here, as well as some materials for book arts. You know, we have stack cutters, book binding equipment, and we also have a zine library, which is like really fun to go through. There's just so much work in there from as far back as like the 80s or 90s with up to, you know, more modern contemporary stuff. But yeah, that's basically the IPRC in the space. I wanted to share a little bit about my experience with the IPRC. Again, this is like one of my favorite spaces here in Portland, and I've, you know, never really seen anything quite like the IPRC. I wish spaces like this existed in cities everywhere, just because of the, you know, the resources and the ability to just come in and, you know, work on things. I, you know, wouldn't be doing the work that I'm creating now if it weren't for, you know, everything that I did at the IPRC. So, oh yeah, I guess I wanted to also share about like our membership and volunteer model here. I recently put up pictures of all of our volunteers on this like big whiteboard that we have near the entrance. But essentially how the IPRC works pre-COVID times, we had numerous volunteers who, you know, would come in and just kind of supervise the different printmaking areas, manning the front desk, you know, charging people for whatever prints that they were making, like on our copy machines. You know, the IPRC, again, like I said, strives to be an affordable space and resource for people. So as a volunteer, you received a studio membership, which is really great, you know, to come in and spend 3 hours a week supervising, and then you have, you know, the rest of your time to come in and use the space. Since COVID, we've had to pause our volunteering, but we still have people coming in. It hasn't been as, you know, serendipitous in the sense that folks have been able to just come in and drop by whenever, but we still see a lot of people through our appointment system come through and working on, you know, their own projects. But I do miss our volunteers. I do miss just kind of the randomness of people popping in and out. So I started at the IPRC again in 2018. I went through the certificate program under the art book section. They have other cohorts doing poetry, prose, and comics. I think my cohort was the first to do art books specifically. And it was such an incredible experience. It was the first time that I ever did any sort of printmaking. My university didn't really offer that while I was there. And I wanted to include this photo up here of Chris about to coat his screen. And that puddle of emulsion at the bottom is actually mine. I had gone right before him. First time I ever tried coating a screen, and I just made a big mess and it left a stain and still there. But I can say that I have a lot more experience in that now. So through the certificate program, I learned how to screen print. I got more hands-on experience with risograph, and I also learned how to letterpress print. It was so, you know, awesome and empowering to learn how to do everything in here. And I think that's the great thing about the certificate program. You know, all of these folks come in from varying backgrounds and abilities, and everyone learns how to use everything in here. After you go through the certificate program, you have, I believe it's a year or two of studio membership. So it's a really great way to get into the space and to be a part of the community because you're learning and making, and then you have like all of this time afterwards to continue coming through. Just some projects that I worked on during the certificate program, some letterpress stuff. I was very proud of this lockup. It took me like 2 days to put together. And then this was the final project that I did during the certificate program. Our cohort was tasked with creating like a final book piece. And this was what I did. It was a letterpress and silkscreen printed book with the transparency covers. So there's some process there in the final piece. And then here are other projects that other students have worked on throughout the certificate program. It's a really, broad variety of things that people work on. I do want to give a shout out to Emily Prado, who did the funeral for Flaca. She went through the program, I believe, at the same time that I did. She did the, I think, prose track. And now her book is actually getting published by a publishing house, which is so awesome. I love that, I guess you could call it like a success story, but this was someone who went through the program, learned all the printmaking skills, self-published her own book, and now it's, this whole bigger thing. Yeah. In addition to providing, resources, space, and equipment for people to work in, we do a lot of programming, teaching different types of workshops, not just, in technical skills, but also, collage nights, different sort of like writing workshops around different topics. My friend Grace, who also went through the certificate program with me, after she went through the program, she started leading workshops here kind of around, the environment and sustainability and embodiment, which are all like things that she was really interested in. We have a poetry practice space every month during the pandemic. That's been virtual, but where, folks come and share their own work and get feedback and support each other in that area. I could go on about all of, what we do here, but its main thing is that it's not just, a printmaking studio. There's so much happening in here. And I think the main thing about the IPRC that makes it so special is that there is a big emphasis on community. And yeah, I think I have more photos. Social justice is another really huge value at the IPRC, and just seeing how that plays out in everything that we do here, and how we try to support, not just the community members who come in through the space, but also throughout, the greater Portland metro area. Last summer we had all these protests happening here in Portland, and several times, we offered up our space for people to just come and make posters for those events. So yeah, there's a lot that happens here. I know this event we're talking about, books and bookmaking, which is part of it. But I think the bigger part that is important to me, and I think is so important to the rest of the staff at the IPRC, is the community aspect, because I think that's just like, I don't know, it's just a value. It's, for me, it's one of the most important things. We're not just creating in a bubble. Everything that we do connects to others in some way. And so, yeah, we really care about, each other, and finding ways to support each other, whether that's, offering sliding scale for memberships or printing, or offering free printing services for folks who can't afford that. One of the things that I wanted to do when I arrived here was really try to branch out and find ways to bring in community members who aren't typically a part of the art or publishing scene, whether that's like older folks or young kids. So that's kind of what we do here at the IPRC. I love it here. It's a great space. And if you're ever in Portland, definitely reach out, even if you just want to come take a tour of the space, we'd love to have you.
Thank you. I would also do a shout out just I attended most things last weekend for Makeready, and IPRC came up quite a lot. A lot of people here have got their start of their practices in there, and I know a lot of Portland folks run their entire practice out of the IPRC. Plus, y'all have been an inspiration to a lot of us who are trying to build these sort of open, accessible, and sustainable workspaces for people in Seattle. So yeah, so that's excellent. I'll shift it to a pair who've been doing a lot of, through many different names, a long lineage of comics in Seattle, but we'll turn it over to Mundane Fantasy, AKA Rain and Mimi.
All right, thank you. There we go. Can you all see that okay? Sweet.
Awesome.
Take it away.
So hi, I'm Rain,
I'm Mimi.
and we are co-publishers at Mundane Fantasy Comics. Mundane Fantasy Comics actually has a pretty interesting start. We started off as a free comics newspaper back in 2016 called Thick as Thieves, and then morphed into Hairflip Comics in 2019. Thick as Thieves Comics, we were able to exist as a free comics newspaper by holding events and release parties, as well as connecting with donors. And in 2019, when one of the founders of Thick as Thieves stepped down, I kind of joined a more, I guess, collaborative role with Hairflip Comics, managing distro and working with the other founder to coordinate artists. We still sustained ourselves via a release party model, but we kind of moved more into booking shows, and we also had a really fantastic event in 2019 at the Belltown Yacht Club, which was a horror-themed drag show, which was awesome. But unfortunately, in 2020, we were not able to continue with events, so we moved into more of a online subscription and online distribution model. The other founder of Thick as Thieves and Hairflip Comics stepped down in 2020. So myself and Mimi kind of took over to become co-publishers, and that's now Mundane Fantasy.
Yeah, so I came onto the Mundane Fantasy team from a background in making my own comics and kind of teaching myself how to do a little bit of DIY publishing. So I was excited to bring some of those skills that I learned about making zines and a little bit of InDesign, a little bit of formatting on the computer, and bring that into this project. And I had been a contributor of Thick as Thieves and Hairflip kind of in more recent issues. So I just care a lot about this publication. I was excited to join the team and help it grow. So there were a lot of benefits to having a free newspaper. It's very accessible. It's really cheap to put out. It's really cheap to print. You can reach a wide audience. You can just drop a stack kind of anywhere and people will pick it up. But there's also some downsides to having a free newspaper. The newspaper model, it's very disposable. It's not supposed to last a long time. It falls apart. It's not really meant to live on a shelf. It deteriorates. So with all these changes happening, we thought it was an interesting opportunity to switch format. So we decided to switch from a free newspaper to a zine, just partly to honor the time and effort it takes to make comics. And comics are experiencing a interesting time in the spotlight right now. I feel like comics are kind of going from being seen as this lowbrow art form to being honored as a art form with a capital A. You can sometimes see comics in museums, they're in galleries, they're kind of getting the recognition that I think they deserve, which is really exciting. So we wanted to honor that with this format that could live on a coffee table or on your bookshelf for a really long time. And do you want to talk about the subscription model?
Oh yeah, so with COVID and shifting towards a subscription model, we figured along with honoring the artists that contribute with a different format, we would also honor them by paying them for their work, which when you make a free comics newspaper is kind of impossible. So we switched to a GoFundMe subscription model so that we could have people subscribe in advance, and we're doing all of our distro in-house. So if you did subscribe and you're visiting with us today, you have an issue coming to you very soon.
So the way that we get our content, we have a totally open submission policy, but we try to keep it local. So we try to keep it Seattle surrounding area, which is how the free newspapers had been as well, just to showcase all the talent that's here, because there's a lot. And we try to be as inclusive as we can. We try to have a focus on that, just to sort of contrast the historically white male dominated comic scene, especially in this area. So we try to have that as a main focus when we're accepting submissions. And each issue has a theme. So our first issue under the name Mundane Fantasy is our namesake, but in past issues of the newspaper, they've had cowboys and aliens, they've had holiday themes like the, gushy Valentine's Day theme and scary Halloween themed, things like that. And then the programs that we use, fairly common programs like InDesign, but the printer that we worked with, who we're going to talk about more in just a minute, goes by the name Anemone, and they created this really awesome program that's free to download. It's called Spectralite, and it helps you print with a risograph. So you can upload your image, it creates the correct grayscale for that image, and also shows you what it'll look like in the risograph ink that you choose. So you can select the ink and it creates a mock-up for you. So it's a really rad program that kind of demystifies the risograph printing experience. And it's really quite simple, but it was always kind of scary to us and to, I don't know, some of the artists as well. So this really just simplifies the process. We're going to talk more about Anemone now.
Yeah, so Anemone is run by a person named Amelia that I connected with through SoftSpot, which is a small local gallery that I co-run with some friends in Beacon Hill in Seattle. She worked on a few projects that we carried in our zine library, and I really connected with all of these projects. I thought they looked incredible, and the content that Amelia was producing was just really interesting to me. So I felt like it was kind of a happy accident that we happened to connect, and Mimi and I both thought that Riso would be a really interesting way to put this comic issue out. So we connected with Amelia, and our collaboration was awesome. She really walked us through all the steps of Riso. Like Mimi said, Riso is kind of intimidating if you haven't worked with it before. And she was able to demystify that experience for us completely. I feel like I have learned so much, and I feel like I understand a lot more about what's happening. And it was really great to work with her in general, just because we could be with her in real time. We were able to go to her home and assemble and see the Riso printer and look at all of her materials and supplies and kind of discuss that with her in real time. So that was really fantastic.
Want to talk about the artist check-in
Oh,
too?
yeah. Sorry, I forgot about that. Amelia is also, this is just a big plug for Amelia because she's doing a Riso workshop, which you should sign up for immediately if you haven't already. But she also hosted a virtual check-in with all of the artists in the first issue. They could come in, drop in on a Zoom call and just ask any questions they might have about Riso or how their pages were looking or formatting or just anything technical that was maybe confusing. And, being a part of Thick as Thieves, Hair Flip, and Mundane Fantasy Comics, I am not usually the person doing any sort of technical formatting stuff. I'm doing like fundraising or event planning or connecting with artists and, things that are kind of more behind the scenes and not technically working with these types of programs. So it was really awesome for her to lead that and support the artists in making sure their work was ready for print.
We love information sharing.
We do, yes.
So the name and the general look of the zine, of course, most of the pages look really different because each page is from a different artist with their own comic style. But the overall theme was inspired by our name, Mundane Fantasy, which really stemmed from being at home so much this past year during the pandemic and finding magic in the mundane and finding ways to daydream and entertain ourselves, using fantasy to escape and using boredom as a portal to get creative. So we just tried to keep that theme alive with our fonts and our layouts and some of our graphics throughout the zine.
Yeah, Mimi and I were actually on a really drizzly quarantine walk, and trying to cover up from the rain, walking around the lake and thinking about all the different names we could do, and Mundane Fantasy just seemed really appropriate after the year we had just lived through.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so production. So like I said, we met with Amelia in person. This is some real live video from our experience. And we hand produced each of the 100 copies that we have printed, which didn't take as long as you'd think. We collated them all, folded them, stapled them, had an assembly line going on the dining room table, and it was really great. I felt like that was one of the most important experiences as someone who's new to this format with zine format, that we could actually assemble it ourselves. And yeah, each issue is mailed out with either Rezo prints, stickers, or merch that we're still working on right now, depending on subscription model. But we're doing all of our distro in-house, AKA Mimi's house, taking it to the post office, doing all that good stuff. So
very DIY.
Yeah, very DIY.
So here is a brief look at the amazing contributors that we have. I think we had 16.
16, yep.
16 different artists. So here are all their names and their usernames on Instagram. Maybe you see a familiar face or you are a fan of one of their works. All the more reason to check out Mundane Fantasy issue 1. So we have all the issues. They're here, they're ready, and we're having a release party at Soft Spot, the gallery that Rain helps run on Beacon Hill, on June 26th and 27th, and you can stop by in person and pick up a copy. Or, as we mentioned, you can also order it through the GoFundMe. But if you, and at the release party, all of the artists are also going to have some non-comics art or alternative art up on the wall, so you can see even more work by our featured artists at that show.
So yeah,
that's us.
That's us. That's all we have.
So here's our email if you want to stay in touch. You can also follow along with quicker updates on Instagram at mundanefantasy_comics. And as we mentioned, if you're interested in checking out a copy, there's the link to our GoFundMe. I believe we still have copies left that haven't been claimed.
42. So
there you go.
That's all.
Move fast on those copies.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing. I'll second the Amelia shout out, just in that, like, Amelia and I started doing Risograph about the same time together about a year ago, and have just been, she's so open and sharing resources and stuff. And a lot of the work that she's doing is on giving people access via things like Spectralite and documentation of her workflow to making zines really easily. So I think the workshop that she's doing next weekend is actually like a no proprietary or paid software workflow to making a zine. So it's like Google Docs to Spectralite to like printing the thing. So yeah, she's fantastic. Okay, so we'll move on to the last of our panelists, which is Shelf, a Chicago-based publisher, who I ran into at the same time that I learned about the Seattle Art Book Fair, actually, at the last short run that happened in person. And yeah, my thoughts on them are that they're incredible and do such amazing design and curation and publishing work in a like wide variety of fields. Like Shelf puts out a lot of different things. But I'll turn it over to them to talk about their work.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Robert.
Very sweet introduction. Shelf is myself and Austin White. So we're going to kind of bounce back and forth a little bit here. I'm in Seattle right now. Austin's in Chicago. I'm going to share my screen so that we can all kind of walk through some of our workflow and process a bit. And we'll bounce back and forth between different editions. Can everyone see my presentation here?
Yep.
Perfect. So introductory kind of level, and let me start a timer here too so I can keep myself to our 10 minutes. But Austin and I met fall 2016, and then later that year, while we were both enrolled as undergrads at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, ended up living together in the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago. And it was through our shared involvement in the visual communication design program at the school, and our kind of like shared typographic sensibilities that we developed as like designers living under the same roof, that Shelf came about as kind of a joint curatorial endeavor, and also kind of just like a practice of swapping InDesign files back and forth and asking for feedback. And it was that kind of like slow tiptoeing into collaboration that that wound up as the publishing practice that it is today.
And so Lucas kind of spoke to it a little bit already, but we both kind of were living together, starting to collaborate, really kind of looking over each other's shoulders at what we were working on. And we started to realize that we shared a lot of opinions, ideas, thoughts, and we really kind of wanted to start to work together. And kind of pieces that made us realize that are these two works here. So on the left, we have The Designer as a Creator of Content, which is a sort of manifesto that I had written in the middle of my undergrad at SAIC, talking about design and art and originality. It's written only in quotes and footnotes. The footnotes actually outnumber the word length of the like actual text of the manifesto, the quotes. And the piece on the right, Lucas, do you want to talk about Disruptor?
Yeah, Disruptor is a kind of a serial publication, a zine that I started actually while living here in Seattle back in kind of late 2015. There are 6 issues of it to date now. The first 2 I printed with Dearest Aiden and Michael, who run Cold Cube Press, who will be speaking tomorrow, I believe, doing a little studio visit. And they were kind of the ones who first got me hooked on risography as a process and a way to kind of formalize the photo work and the text that I was generating at the time. And when I moved to Chicago later that year, Disruptor was something that followed me in my travels and has been kind of a way to make myself, kind of force myself to explore the ins and outs of like the DIY punk and hardcore and like subcultural communities within Seattle, Chicago, and other places that I've visited and documented. And that over time, has led to this, quite a variety of different approaches to like how the photography is done, how the text is created, and like what those collaborations with different artists and performers in these cities look like. The most recent issue we did of Disruptor was, I suppose, 2 summers ago now. Time seems to have flown by, and there have obviously been no shows or performances to document the past year. But this most recent issue, the 6th issue, is kind of an in-depth archival tour almost of a group in Chicago called Ono, who've been around since the early 80s, making an incredible blend of gospel and noise, kind of an avant-garde hybrid music genre, which is was really a treat to get to speak with them.
And so those, the 2 issues of Disruptor that were on the previous slide kind of were both owned by Lucas. He was kind of, it's his project that I really just consulted on. And that's kind of how we started Shelf, just like I would hold a document and run the work, and then he would do the same thing, and we would just collaborate and give ideas, not so much swap back and forth. And then the first issue where we kind of started to work together a little bit more was this here, Poetics of the Ordinary, a kind of collection of work from a class that I was in at the time at my final semester at SAIC with Matthew Goulish, called Poetics of the Ordinary. And I think we both had a desire to make books and make lots of books. And so I saw the class as an opportunity to kind of like, let's all get together, let's make a lovely book, and let's start and see if Shelf can really release stuff on their own together, and let's see how this goes.
And it's through those first kind of 2 releases, those being the 5th issue of Disruptor and Poetics of the Ordinary, and then this 3rd release, On Being Read, which we debuted at the Chicago Art Book Fair in 2018, that we kind of started to systematize a production workflow as well. At this time, I was working at the Service Bureau at SAIC, and so I had kind of really fortunate and robust access to a wide variety of print production tools, mainly a Riso, which was like, having worked with Cold Cube in the past, the first time that I'd really had like a machine of my own to really get my hands dirty with. So this was the first time we were experimenting with different color profiling processes, and really had like a lot of time to experiment and try different options out in what we could do formally. And this project specifically came from a past issue of a journal called On Journal that our good friend Gabrielle Welsh started around the same time that Shelf was actually getting going in spring 2018. And the first issue, On the Art of Failure, then kind of transitioned and came under the Shelf imprint later that summer with On Being Read.
And it began kind of a long sort of collaborative practice where often it's not just us working on a sort of book piece or art book object. It's an editor or authors or other people coming to us and working together as a group. It's not always just us.
And On Being Read was also, I suppose, the second time really, because we hosted a similar sort of program for Poetics of the Ordinary after its release, but was our first time really kind of experimenting with what a book looks like after or in addition or running parallel to the pages and the text itself, and also the ways that contributors in those books could reimagine and rework their contributions. So with these anthology style things, we then decided it would be fruitful to invite artists and writers back for an event setting, for a reading. A lot of artists chose to work in a video or pre-recorded format. So this is Sebcha in Hawaii actually doing a virtual reading. And there were other films screened, other live readings that were adaptations of the work in the anthology. Around that same time, we also, for the Chicago Art Book Fair, debuted our 4th edition, which is titled A Book That Is a Bag. And this was kind of our, I mean, in addition to being a nice takeaway for the fair attendees, something that we wanted to try to push at like what the bounds of a book object is in a very formal sense. So the book features, or the bag rather, features on the right-hand side here, a speculative list of bookmaking projects that we always kind of have in the back of our mind when we're working on new editions. So this reads: a book that never stops being printed, a book that we pay you to buy, a book that expires after 30 days, a book with no fixed dimensions, a book that is a little bit wet, a book that is compressed to one bite. And this goes on and is something that we're kind of still generating to this day, trying to think outside of like the limitations of what a book might be in a formal sense.
And many of them are unproducible. They're not something that would ever actually come together in the space of an edition that could be distributed. But alongside that sort of very speculative dreamland sort of work, our other roommate, Rohan at the time, came to us with the idea of doing interviews about rooms and their connection to your interior space, which after this past year and a half that we've all been living through, I think is even more relevant. Kind of the space that you live in really does affect that internal mind space that we all possess. And this took form as 6 individual 16-page zines that are consecutively numbered from top to bottom. So there's 6 issues here. They could all theoretically be bound together as one sort of book, or what we ended up doing was just saddle stitched kind of separate, distinct editions that have the interview along with illustrations that Rohan McDonald did in response to those interviews that he had done, kind of illustrating the space and the words that they use to describe their spaces.
We'll fly through some of the rest of this stuff because
yeah.
we're kind of close, but it was around this time too that we kind of started doing more client-based commission design work. So this was the first of 3 now that we've done Masters of Fine Arts in Photography catalogs for the School of the Art Institute. And these were designed by us and then produced by a printer in the suburbs of Chicago. And it was also around this time that we decided to embark on a 3rd issue of Gabrielle Welsh's On Journal, which has really kind of been our most extensive and maybe adventurous publication to date, just in terms of the scope of production and the scope of contributors. There's my timer. here are interior spreads from that. And this also accompanied a set of programs. On the left is our original call for submissions poster. In the middle here is a reading we hosted at Level 3 Gallery with a handful of the contributors. And then on the right is a program we hosted for the Chicago Art Book Fair that year, which involved my moderating a conversation with Maria Gaspar and Josh Rios on their contributions to that book. Around that same time, we worked with an artist in Chicago, Daniel Champion, kind of in the same vein as our previous collaboration with Rohan McDonald, where instead of this anthology style, we're working with a singular artist to kind of bring about a body of work, or like bring it to life through a printing process. There's a lot of like really direct collaboration with test prints and color overprinting and profiling to get as close to the artist's original intention as possible. Austin, if you want to talk about Jamais a little bit.
Yeah, and then similar to kind of gaining sort of clients, we have been working with a Chicago-based satellite gallery, Apparatus Projects, and they came to us with an exhibition catalog that they had kind of 90% finished, sort of almost there. And they were like, can you guys carry this over the finish line? Can you help us produce this, print this? And we were really struck. We loved the show. And we ended up kind of saying, this is great, but we want to redo the whole thing. And so that's what we did. We retypeset the entire thing. We pulled it under our umbrella of like a shelf sort of published edition. And then instead of forcing them to sort of pay for the production of it, we took that on our own. Printing this, Lucas prints pretty much all of the work that you've seen so far on our own. Yeah, I'll leave that there because we're starting to run out of time.
Last couple of things here, just like COVID updates. In November of last year, we started renting a studio space in West Humboldt. This is the like kind of disaster condition that we received it in. This is our little section of it now. We share with 5 other artists. So it's packed pretty tight with painters and ceramicists and fibers artists. And this is our little section where we work on new editions. We've been doing more client exhibition catalog work. This is a recent book commissioned by the University of Chicago's MFA program. And the kind of latest segue that we've taken has been into online radio broadcasting with a new program called Music Arts. And that is more so a project between myself and our friend Will Crowland. We've been commissioning bi-monthly sound art broadcasts that are performed live from the Shelf studio. And this has been kind of a way of thinking about what publishing could mean in a very literal sense of just making public through sound rather than a printed medium. So that is, yeah, a little intro to what we do. And maybe Robert can guide us into the conversation section.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. I always love seeing your work, especially some of the newer things that I hadn't seen. Okay, so we'll segue that into the dialogue portion of things. So our theme this weekend, as part of Makeready, is making a book, right? And that falls under the lens of design, of production, etc. And yet, as we've seen from all of us, sometimes what we make is not really book shaped, like making a drag show or an event or a reading or a radio station or prints or bookmarks or things like that. So my first question is, and this can't go into book or outside of book, is how do your projects or the projects of the people that you're working with find form? Like what factors into you holding an idea in the air and saying, okay, at this point, I'm comfortable to say that this is the shape this thing will take. And that's open to everyone, whoever, we'll mull it, but whoever wants to chime in, go for it.
It's funny, the first thing that I thought of when you asked that question maybe kind of contradicts it a little bit, but is this thing that Ed Ruscha had said, which was that like the idea for the book comes first before any sort of content or form or like idea of what something might be about. It doesn't matter what it's about, the book comes first. And so I think that there's, despite what despite what the formal constraints or budget constraints or whatever it may be end up necessitating, there is like an excitement about whatever a book is, essentially, which is contested, as you've just said, and we're all working in these different mediums as well, but there's maybe something fundamental there about bookness, or a sequence, or the spaces that a book constitutes, that is like what is most exciting.
I think what comes up for me too is like, you can have an idea for something and like think like, okay, this is what I want to do, and this is what I want it to look like. And then you go into it and you start making it. And I think what I love so much about printmaking and like Riso and, all of these different processes is that like you can start working on something and then something will happen that will like shift your direction. With letterpress, I often find myself like I have the thing written out, and as I'm like putting the individual like letters together, I'm like, actually, wait, this sounds better if I did it like this, or things like that. With Riso, I mean, I don't know if this ever happens to you guys, but like you start printing something and it messes up in some way, and you realize like, wait, but that looks better than what I originally thought, so I'm just going to go with that. Things like that. I don't know, I call it serendipity. It's just like my favorite part of the process. It's the stuff that you don't plan for that comes across in the finished piece.
Something I'm thinking of relevant to our publication is it's so collaborative, not only with getting submissions from almost 20 different artists, but also between the two of us, and then working closely with Anemone as our printer. It's like almost no one's one baby. Like, I don't know where this comes from. It comes from like an energy between everyone that's involved. But, I might have one idea in my head, you might have one idea in your head, but the thing that actually comes out physically is something that at least I like had never thought of. So I don't know, it just comes out of this like space between, which I think is so awesome.
It's almost like a mystery that you have to wait until it's actually printed and assembled to know what it's actually going to look like. Yeah, which is the most exciting and chaotic part about it. But what I'm really interested in is just like having it assemble itself in a way and see what we turn up with. And it's always been great. So I'm going to hope that keeps working.
I want to follow up on, sorry, go ahead. Austin.
Oh, okay. I think of this like a bookfinding form in the sense of like what came first, the chicken or the egg, and like the content versus the actual physical product. They kind of ebb and flow or start at different rates. Sometimes the content will come first, the book will come second. Sometimes there's really just a desire to make something, to physically play around with the production processes and like see what comes out experimentally, and then make something after that. So yeah, it's a tough sort of ebbing and flowing and just circular sort of process, I think, for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of the list of, I posted them in the chat, but the list of speculative books that you guys had on the bag. And I teach one of the lectures I teach to my little students, this is the dumbest lecture. It's called How to Read. But it's basically like how to engage with reading and how to like think about things while you're reading or doodle things and things like that. And one of the things that I give them is to like jot down all the ideas you have, however strange they are, about the like media that you're working of, like, oh, what if I made such and such strange thing? So I think probably a bunch of us also collect these like speculative books, right? The like projects that may yet be, but do not yet exist, or like are missing a part, or need dialogue, like you guys were talking about, that need like other hands on them in order to happen. So yeah, I find that fascinating. I also like want to underline the idea of, in order to have a conversation about the relationship between the content of a book and the form of the book, we're first like drawing a line between the content and the form, when often there is not a line there, right? So anyway, I find that all very interesting. I'll pivot that little bit of the conversation to talk about access to materials and resources a little bit, and how that goes for each of you guys, because I know that especially during COVID, that's something that has shifted a lot, and that you all do, like, that's an incredibly important part to putting something together.
guess I can talk first. So prior to COVID, we had open studio hours and folks could come in, you know, as long as the studio was open, it was fair game. And since then, we've had to shift to an appointment system to, you know, limit the number of people in the space. And thankfully that's worked for us so far. And in some ways, you know, there are some benefits to doing an appointment system rather than like an open studio free-for-all, because that, you know, at least you can plan on like, okay, I'm going to come in and screen print, and I know that nobody else is going to be in the screen printing area. I'm going to have the whole space to myself to work on things. So in that sense, you know, having access to the space and like knowing, you know, how much time you have is really, really great. We also try to, because I'm the one scheduling the appointments, I try to be very flexible with people and like, you know, we have the structure in place of how we do things, but also like, if you need 6 hours to work on your project, like we can do that. If you only need 1 hour, we can do that too. So that's part of it, trying to be flexible and understanding that, you know, the times that we're living in kind of suck. And so how can we make it less sucky?
I think maybe this is best answered anecdotally, that like something that happened to Austin and I the other day, and that happens pretty often and has happened pretty often over the past 2 years or so that we've been doing this, is that people will reach out and ask us for like contract reso printing jobs, like to send us their files or their books to have us print them. And I often have to just write emails back saying that we've become really adept at like appearing to own a risograph. And that's something that we've never done. It's always just been kind of like by circumstance that we have access to them through either Cold Cube while I lived here, or through the Art Institute while we were both students there, or through other publishers or studios in Chicago, ranging from our good friends at Platform to the folks at Sputnik Press and Perfectly Acceptable, who we've all worked with in different capacities. And so it's more just like having a very, you know, having this like fortunate situation that we have a lot of friends and access around in the community. And I think the biggest thing over the past year or so has been losing that direct access to specifically the school's print resources, and having to find these ways to like forge those networks of access for ourselves. And also in, you know, like having this studio space now to reevaluate what our practice means, and also sometimes relinquish a little bit of like production control over to either like other contractors, like sometimes working with a bindery or occasionally with another printer, versus doing every little aspect of the production process ourselves, which is a tricky thing because we're control freaks and we read those like material choices as textual. We consider it authorship. And so it's tough to do that relinquishing, but we're like, yeah, like adapting and finding new models to maybe disperse and decentralize how we work.
Can I add, that reminds me, like I get asked, you know, people will reach out and be like, hey, like I have this zine that I want to publish. Can you guys print this for me? And it's like, no, that's not what we do. Like you can come and do it yourself. And if you don't know how to do it yourself, well, like we can show you, like whether that's, you know, giving them a workshop, or like even myself, like when I'm around, I often find myself helping people out with like InDesign stuff, or even just like the copiers. For some reason, like out of all the equipment that we have in this space, our copiers are like the most, they give me the most headaches. But yeah, helping people out a lot. It's something that I do here.
I've been thinking about that with the production of this issue, where it was so reliant on kindness and yes, and like the free sharing of information and just being there for each other as much as it was possible during this past year. And that the ideas for this came from, you know, COVID safe walks around the lake in the rain. And then eventually we're able to meet in each other's living rooms masked. And then we're able to print this in another living room. So I don't know, it was very like homegrown in the literal sense of the word, which felt really special because I had been used to doing projects that were, either like at my college in the production studio or outsourcing to other printers, binderies, etc. So it was fun to like physically have a hand in every step of the process, and very much having it happen at home.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a big departure from Thick as Thieves and Hair Flip, where we kind of turned it over to a publishing, like third-party publishing, who was amazing to work with, but we would kind of email our work, have it printed, go and pick it up. There wasn't much interaction other than that. So yeah, I really appreciate this type of practice where we're more involved. And also I think both of us are maybe like a diet control freak. So like, you know, like a very light version of control freak. So I sympathize, Lucas, with wanting to be there and be a part of every part of the process. And also just like, I want to know everything I can about what I'm working on. So having the ability to see what machines are, you know, try not to break Robert's stapler, you know, wearing little finger rubber things to like slide different pages together, just, you know, touching everything. That's what I want to do.
I think there's something as well in that collaborative act of like being in a space, working together and assembling, collating, binding, trimming, all of that, where you're able to kind of disconnect mentally from the work and even start to brainstorm about new projects or even just have good conversation. And that's something that Lucas and I think, kind of miss, in addition to just not being able to use the risograph at SAIC quite as frequently as we had pre-pandemic. Just that like being in the same space, touching the physical objects, having a hand in every step of the process. So I'm very jealous to hear that your most recent issue of Mundane Fantasy was all assembled by you. That's so amazing.
I feel like that might be the road that we're headed in like post-COVID times, is like everyone's going to be as hands-on as humanly possible. There will be not even a phone call. You like have to be in the same room or like shouting across a field or something. Because I don't know. I think this is a road that we're headed down. Lucas is in Seattle right now and was able to visit like this little space that I'm in right now with common area maintenance, where we're getting a reso up and running and then figuring out how to give people access to it and stuff. It's been very much like, it's been sputtering with its paper. Sometimes it takes things, sometimes it doesn't. The ink has also been like, who really can say? But at this point I'm on board with it. And I've been really encouraged to see like when people are given access to resources, whatever, regardless of sort of where they are, people figure out how to make things with what they have, right? And we've all dealt with having a lot less access to things right now. So I'm very, very curious sort of what we'll learn from this and what will happen going forward. I guess I'll shift that into a question that I didn't really have on my list of questions, but I'm always excited about. And that's like, what are you guys looking at for next projects and things? Like, where are you headed this summer?
We can go first. Most immediately, we have our actual release party, which we're very much looking forward to. So release party / art show.
Real life experience, which as an extrovert, I am starved for. Can't wait. It's gonna be amazing. And then issue 2.
Yeah, we're trying to publish this biannually. So issue 2 will be coming out in winter. And I'm forgetting who mentioned it, but I think Austin, you were saying when you are working and you can kind of start to daydream about other projects. So like even like, you know, hearing other people talking today and watching all of your presentations, we've been writing notes like, oh, I have this idea for issue 2. And while we were producing issue 1, looking at the different colors that were possible at Anemone. And yeah, our wheels are churning for issue 2. So look out for that.
Coming up for Shelf, we are in talks with Gabrielle Welsh on issue 4 of On. Probably going to open that call the next month or so, I think. We are starting to work on a poetry serial, probably bi-monthly or maybe quarterly to some degree. So that should come out maybe closer to the end of the summer or fall. And then also starting to get back into in-person programming, which is something that we both started to really get enamored by after getting into that pre-pandemic. It got totally ripped away from us, and hopefully we'll be able to do some kind of small-ish poetry reading outdoors this summer.
And I'll add too that the music arts programming that we've started is hopefully in line with what Austin just said, also going to adapt to some in-person like live sound performance work. And that's kind of been the most consistent like bi-monthly programming that we've been able to do throughout the spring. We had the debut performance by Kanal Nula back in March, and then mid-April, Jordan Rios of that group Ono that we worked with for Disruptor performed in the space. And then next month on June 13th, we just announced today, Kira Skirbin and Isabel Francis McGuire of Chicago Artist Club are going to be joining us for a live performance. So yeah, adapting to different formal possibilities throughout this time and trying to ease our way back into different modes for print as well.
I always feel like I'm not really doing anything. When someone's like, what are you working on? I'm like, nothing, but that's not actually true. I guess a little bit farther off into the future, but we're having here at the IPRC having talks about the next certificate program cycle and how we're thinking of updating, shifting the programming a little bit. But it's all very exciting. I don't have things fully set in stone. We're still like, figuring out pandemic stuff. Our last certificate program cycle got kind of, I don't even know the word. It just kind of didn't derail. Wouldn't say derailed, but it was an interesting adapting. So planning for the next certificate program, I'll be teaching in that cycle in some capacity. I'm not quite sure exactly what yet, but very excited. Something along book design. That's what I'll be doing. And we just selected, I didn't mention this in my presentation, but we just selected the residents for our residency program. I think this is our third time doing it for Black, Indigenous, and other artists of color. So we just picked those artists out. Well, I didn't, we had a panel. And I'm so excited. They're all really great. We had so many people apply and so many well-deserving people who unfortunately were not selected, but I am really excited for the new residents to come in to, show them the entire space. They'll have access to, the studio and then the public programming that they'll be doing later on in the year. So yeah, that's coming up here at the IPRC. Exciting things.
I want to ask a question sort of on behalf, hopefully, of some of the folks that we have in the room, which is your standard, like, what advice do you have question? But specifically, I want to say, like, if you're interested in bookmaking or have familiarity with it, what advice do you have in terms of finding a community, getting access to production methods or people, things like that? What sort of guidelines would you give folks?
As kind of a newbie, I would say just be willing and open to talk to people and make connections. So many of the projects I've ever been a part of have happened just because I've asked someone a question or someone seemed interesting and I wanted to chat with them and get to know them a little bit better. Oftentimes I'll find something that I think is interesting, whether it be a book or a piece of art, and I'll just find the person online, maybe on Instagram or on their website, and I'll send them a message because it never hurts to ask. And the worst that anyone can say is no. And so if you're interested in making something, it's totally possible. You just need to put yourself out there.
Yeah, I would totally echo that. it's, yeah, super important to just talk to people and that can be really intimidating. But I guess also like the other hand of that is like how approachable you make yourself to others. So, you know, like we hope that other people are like welcoming and friendly and able to, you know, if not help us, at least point us in the right direction. But also I think it's good to think about like what your capabilities are, like what resources do you have yourself, and what do you have to offer or share. And you know, with that, I want to say, and you can always, you know, reach out to the IPRC or reach out to me directly if you have questions or want assistance, because yeah, I know it can be scary to reach out to people and not knowing if they'll react well, but I'm here, we're here, and we are always happy to help and yeah, get people to the right resources.
I think that like exchange and reciprocity is like kind of the most important thing here, both in terms of making yourself accessible and not being scared to reach out to other people. That's certainly how, you know, Disruptor and kind of like the early zine experiments in Seattle started for Shelf Shelf, was just like emailing the Gold Cube guys out of the blue. And I had no idea what I was doing at the time in any sense. And also, I can't tell you how many copies of every single thing we do, we just give out for free or trade with people. And like that often feels like the most, you know, meaningful form of like, you know, like finding potential collaborators in the future, or just people that will like then be really interested in the work. And I think that is like a super rewarding part of the process, is like, you know, kind of again like relinquishing an idea of profit here or like growth, and just being like, this is the community building aspect, and this is like how the connections are forged.
Okay, so I want to sort of wander back in the direction of design, probably for our last little bit of this discussion before we open it up to everyone else. And not necessarily the design, but I want to acknowledge that each of us sort of has our own practices outside of our publishing branch, right? And experiences, some from design backgrounds, some from other visual arts backgrounds. And sometimes those wander into the things that we're publishing, and sometimes they don't. So what I'm curious about is, what has whatever visual language that you speak most directly, what has your personal practice lended to your publishing practice?
I can start with this one. I hold a full-time job outside of Shelf Shelf as a designer with the Department of Design at Leo Burnett, which is the large, huge global ad agency. So I am like one person inside of a 14-person team inside of a 900-person agency inside of a multi-thousand person sort of global network. So I view Shelf Shelf as this really great sort of me being my own client, me being able to really direct and flow the work. So it really, my daytime job makes me very grateful to have that that platform where I can do what I'm thinking instead of kind of pleasing or people pleasing toward a client's perspective.
Oh, I can hop in here too. This is something that Robert and I talked a little bit about the other day, because we you know, got to talking about the visual communication design program at SAAC that both Austin and I went through, and obviously the Cornish design program as well. And I was just kind of explaining how I felt like the design education, or like any sort of idea of a formal design education that I or we received, was in every sense secondary to the maybe more peripheral or marginal encounters with other departments that I had at the school. And those included things like the Joan Flash artist books collection, or the like sound department, and getting to explore work by like language poets and performance artists and people working with text and print as mediums, but not like solely through the lens of design or like bookmaking. And it was then like working through and around these other departments and through and around these other mediums and going to, you know, gallery exhibitions and collecting printed ephemera throughout the city that I think we were able to, you know, begin to think about what shelf meant as a practice. And even though we both maybe utilize this formal training in design, and it informs how we set type and how we view layout and imagery and how we view binding, it's not it's not so much those things that are like central or foundational to the work. And like Robert and I, we remarked, again, like kind of looking at the serving library or ... stuff, which will be in the reading list that we're going to share later. The idea of publications or a publishing practice coming from design rather than being about design is like definitely an adage that we live by at Shelf as well.
We can go next. So both Rain and I both work full-time, and this is a side project for us. So I work full-time as a middle school art teacher, and I also have my own art practice, or I try to as much as possible. I like to make my own comics and play around with illustration and things like that. So I feel like that informs my design and production choices, because I'm around so much like playfulness and silliness. Like the comics that I make are usually kind of like autobiographical and silly. And like my favorite like art material is puffballs and like glitter glue. So I'm around that all the time. So sometimes my challenge area is like tightening up a bit and kind of getting it to a place that can actually be like printed out and is legible. So that sort of informs some of my choices for this publication.
Yeah, similarly, I was a third grade teacher for 3 years, and now I work in curriculum development for social emotional learning. So a lot of my practice is informed by just being pretty like accessible, but also just kind of a goofball. I don't take anything really that seriously, and I think that there's a lot of room to grow when you don't take yourself that seriously or take things that seriously. Yeah, just being really flexible and open, especially as a person who's always kind of been behind the scenes, co-running gallery, being more of an event planner, the person who's always emailing everyone. I feel like that really informs my practice, and that I am taking a brave step to be more visual, more representative of the things I'm interested in and things I like, instead of just hiding behind the Gmail account. So
maybe that informs kind of also why we're so into learning every step, because we both work in education.
Yeah, we're both like nerdy teachers who need to know everything.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like the design program that I went through really emphasized human-centered design. And I feel like that translates really well into a whole bunch of different areas. You know, the thing that I got the most out of that was, you know, this process of ideation, where you are just basically brainstorming and coming up with, you know, different ideas and possibilities, and then refining that and kind of going back to, well, what am I trying to make? Like, what do I want to do here? And like, how do these different pieces fit into that? And maybe some of it doesn't. And then doing that whole process over and over again of like brainstorming and then refining and then again, you know, really, that I find myself doing that really with any design project that I'm working on.
Totally. Yeah, I mean, I like all of those as motivators. I think I definitely lean in the direction of like nerdy teacher who wants to learn everything so I can teach everything side of stuff, which I don't know, I guess when I was asked to figure out like, who do you want to talk to? It was definitely like, I don't know, the sort of generosity that you all have with the communities that you work with is incredible. And I think that's so important to publishing. And I know that the Seattle Art Book Fair, like as in organization is like a part of that, is like headed in that direction. Like that's the value of all of this, is developing this community. So we have like 5 minutes left before we transition to open comments. So I'll use that to ask one last little question. And that's, you all work with a wide variety of artists, either like directly sort of helping them elevate their work or publish it or get it out there, or figure out how to like make books and do things like that. So what has that been like, to work with so many people who speak so many different languages visually and come from so many different positionalities and have like familiarity or unfamiliarity with what goes into a book? What's that been like?
It's great. So my job here at the IPRC, you know, a lot of it involves me just being here. Like I'm just here and making sure no one breaks anything, which most people are pretty good. I have no worries there, but I get to see so many different people doing so many different things, whether it's just for themselves, like, or, you know, there's a person who's been coming in like regularly just to do letterpress, and because they just want to practice, like they just want to, you know, do letterpress and get good at it. There's a local publisher in town called Two Plum Press who puts out books. They do that all here at the IPRC. Although he hasn't been in here since I started working. Anyways, yeah, it's just, I enjoy it because I guess my responsibility is very like hands off. I'm just kind of like floating around and I get to just like watch it happen. And like, I'm always like honored when people, you know, trust my opinion and like will ask me for feedback and input. So yeah, that's, for me, it's like, you know, it's a bit different, I think, than the other panelists, because again, it's like, I'm just holding down the fort, and watching other people like make magic happen for the most part. So yeah.
I think something that's present in Shelf's work overall is that we have a wide range of like people we work with. There could be collections of 12 or 14 people that we're doing a sort of catalog or a journal with. We could be self-motivated, like doing that tote bag all on our own. It's me and Lucas writing that, kind of coming up with it. We're our own client in that case, or it could be like an individual collaboration with like one sole person. And I think what's really great about having that mix is when you're working with somebody, just a single person, you can really get to know their expertise within their areas and stuff. So illustrators and painters and drawers, like it's great to see their work and to kind of remove yourself from the visual, or to try and figure out how to match the tone of the work typographically or within the layout. And then if you're working with a larger group, more of a 10+ sort of environment, it becomes a little bit of a fun challenge of how do you design an architecture of a book that can work with each individual contribution without really making one feel like the shining star over another. And so it's kind of an ebb and flow in figuring out how to remove yourself while also still staying present as this designer, and creating a consistent tone and voice while letting moments shine, drop, have climaxes and falls in the overall kind of progression or page turning of the process for the reader's perspective.
For us, we have the pleasure of working with so many different artists for each issue. So that's kind of what we go for, is to have as much variety as possible. So, but it's an interesting balance of figuring out like what is the look of Mundane Fantasy, the publication, versus, you know, of course, every issue is going to look so different inherently because we're featuring hopefully new people every issue. That's the goal. So kind of figuring out what's our identity as a publication versus what do we want to have consistently as content while also keeping it as diverse as possible. I think we'll just never get bored.
Yeah, I think so too. And also the fact that we are kind of, I mean, for each issue of Mundane Fantasy, each issue of Hair Flip, each issue of Thick as Thieves, we've had a different cover artist. So the like brand identity, I guess is what you call it, of Mundane Fantasy is extremely fluid. It's not really set in stone. It can translate to totally different art styles and still maintain itself, which is something I think that's really exciting about this publication. It's been iterative. All of our covers have been different artists, completely different look and feel, but we've still kind of maintained our sense of self. So we're like really looking forward to seeing how Mundane Fantasy transforms over the next few issues.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. My students often come to me with this question. They're like, how do I make it cohesive? And when they're dealing with books, it's very easy to say like, oh, well, as powerful as a brand is also like a staple. Like you literally put it together and then it coheres because it's physically there, right? So I don't know. I have fun with that idea as well. I guess we'll transition it to open questions from the rest of the group. If you guys have things you've been hanging on to, I have lots of backups if you don't. But yeah, welcome. Oh yeah, so you can toss things into the chat. You can also like unmute and just shout them out. Whatever you're feeling.
I have a question. And I'm also willing to share too, but I'm curious, how did you all get into like books, book design, publishing? Like what was your first like introduction, the thing that you were like, this is what I want to do? I can like share first. I was in 8th grade and I saw the high school yearbook. Like that's how I got into publishing, was high school yearbook. And that's like what I did all through high school. Like that was my intro to graphic design and book design and publishing. And then that led me into studying graphic design in school. And like, now I'm here. Like, that's my story. What's yours?
I can go. I feel like my introduction to like comics and then books was like so linked, but I first got into comics because my dad had a bunch of old copies of like underground comics like Zap and like Art Crumb comics and things like that in the house that I got into at probably much too young of an age. And then I remember when I was 18, I went to Short Run for the first time. Love Short Run so much, truly my favorite event every year. And I went with my dad because I didn't know anyone else that was into comics. So I went to Short Run with my dad as an 18-year-old, which was kind of a sweet image.
Beautiful.
And then from there, I was just sort of like a lonely college freshman and started making my own comics. And from there, it kind of turned into self-publishing, and I learned what zines were. And my best friend in college was in the graphic design BFA. And so he would help me make my own zines that kind of got higher quality. I had this annual zine called Muses and Vices that was a submission-based publication. And yeah, my best friend in college would like take me into the graphic design production studio where they had, you know, all this equipment and taught me how to do some basic InDesign work. So a mixture of my dad's comic collection and my best friend in college being a graphic design student.
I'm kind of similar to Jakelen. I was like really I was on the high school like newspaper. I also did the weather for our weird like TV show we had randomly because my name is Rain and they forced me to, but it was fun. I enjoyed it. And I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. So I spent a lot of time in like the DIY punk scene, working on scrappy, crappy zines at Kinko's and like just trying to find stuff to do because there was nothing to do. I've always been making comics in secret in my room and not telling people. So it's exciting to be like more formally involved in something. Teaching myself InDesign, you know, in the middle of the night because I have ADHD and I love to hyper focus on things for like 20 plus hours. So yeah, kind of like informally, formally, just checking it out.
Similar to Jakelen, who kind of discovered the whole printed page through the process of yearbook in middle school. Was it middle school or high school? I, in high school, got involved in drama and quickly learned that I was not meant to be a stage presence at all. I was not meant to be on the stage speaking or kind of reciting lines or singing. But I did learn that I could do posters and kind of programs. So I became kind of the person on the back end, just putting everybody's name in the book. And then because nobody cared what it looked like, it meant I could care a ton about what it looked like. And that was a great discovery, that I could have total control over a sort of printed rectangle space. I think I fell in love.
Yeah, totally the same deal for me, but with Seattle's like kind of underground punk and hardcore community. It was like finding spaces like the Nut Hole and Office Space and Black Lodge in high school, and having an avenue through those to do poster design and like get into printmaking through that. And had I known or been involved in stuff like the Vera at the time, I'm sure that would have been pivotal. Like it was kind of that back door into zine making and poster design that was what opened up the door to like independent publishing.
I feel like I did Lit Mag in high school and like was the editor and put it together, but before like having any respect for what a book was. So it was just trash. Like it's somewhere, but it's awful. And I don't want to think about it in the context of a book. But God, that would be a terrible project to like redo a high school literary magazine now. But yeah, anyway, so I'd say my first like turn to books was, it was my BFA for at Cornish in 2015 or something, and I had this whole thing planned where I was like, oh, I'm gonna like there'll be a structure, there'll be like objects in the structure. It was very curatorial, and people will have this experience with it. And like I didn't know anything about woodworking, and also had no access to a woodworking space. So I like took over a dance studio and just like turned it into this sawdust-filled like terrible den. Needless to say, everything fell apart a day before the show, to be expected. And I was like rolling around on the floor at like 3 a.m. and I was like, oh my God, what do I do? And I ended up just like taking all of the like process stuff from the project, all of the notes and sketches and like essays and stuff, and binding them together into a book and putting it out. And I'll say like contextually, that makes a little bit of sense because the space where I would hang out between the hours of 12 and 2 a.m. was Black Coffee Co-op, RIP, with their copy machine and their little zine store. So yeah, I don't know. That's how I fell into it.
There are no other comments from the rest of the crowd. I also have one that I could maybe pose, which would be because we have in some ways in this conversation centered Riso printing. Like what were the kind of like first encounters you all had with that process, and what do you think it is in some essential sense about risography that draws you toward it in your own work or in other people's work?
I'm going to toss some context onto this and say that Lucas's thesis project was all about like how Riso exists and what connotations it carries with it, and how those have been like usurped by corporations. Anyway, it's worth a read.
I mean, I can follow up and answer that. My first encountering of the Riso was at SAIC. Naturally, it was great resources there, but I think I really sort of had the most of it when I started to work with Lucas, just because he had such access to it and he was such a skilled printer within it that I quickly learned, wow, this is amazing. Like this machine that can cut a film and basically do screen printing or some kind of machined process like that was just satisfying. And it feels like Pantone, or like a sort of poor Pantone, knockoff or limited selection version that becomes really satisfying. In that textural sense, I know everybody says this, but there really is something about it. It looks good. It sits really nicely on so many different kinds of stock. There's so much you can do with it. The layering becomes so fun to play with. And often, I think we all have had these moments where you try to do one thing, something else comes out and you realize, wow, that's better. Let me keep trying and experimenting and playing and seeing what else I can do with this.
Yeah, I don't know exactly like where like the first Riso thing I saw, but I think I was like aware of the like aesthetic. And that was something that I was trying to replicate digitally early in college. I had no idea what Riso was. I just like knew that there was this certain style and aesthetic that felt so like punk and raw, and like I loved it. And eventually I heard about Burnett Books in San Diego. Shout out to Burnett Books. I love those people so much. But they started off as a Riso studio behind the bookshelves of this independent bookstore called Verbatim. Like literally you like walked to the back of the bookstore and like pushed this like bookshelf. It was kind of like a secret door. And yeah, that's where they had their studio. They used to have like open hours. Folks would just like go and just like hang out, like sitting around a little table, and some people would just be like working on art projects. Some people would be printing, but that was, yeah, my first intro to Riso. And I, my first Riso piece was, yeah, my senior year of college. I had my like thesis exhibition and I printed out the invitation cards on Riso. But yeah, Burnett Books, they're still around. They have a subscription system set up, and they're also in the process of like merging spaces with what used to be a gallery space in San Diego, Terrace Gallery. Amazing people. They're all like good friends of mine, and I just like want to give them a shout out because they were kind of like my intro into art and publishing within like the San Diego scene.
My introduction to Riso, when I was in college, I was helping out with this DIY publishing, not even a company, I don't know, some guy that published cool books in like a church attic. And I went with that publishing project to April Fest, which is no longer a thing. It used to be hosted by the Hugo House. And the person who ran this publishing project was friends with the people at Cold Cube. And since they were buds, we went and visited their studio back at their old space, probably a few spaces ago. And I didn't know anything about risograph printing. I was like, you know, probably hungry and bored, and I didn't really know where we were or why we were there. And I just started rummaging through the recycling bin. Oh man, the coolest trash I'd ever seen in my life. I think I still have some of the old Cold Cube trash up on my wall. It's gorgeous, the most beautiful trash. And so that was kind of my introduction. I was like, this is really rad. And then after that, learning more about book arts and printing, I went to different festivals and was helping out with other projects and just kind of got more into it and got to do one little baby workshop with Cold Cube to learn some of the basics, and then learned a little bit more through Amelia with Anemone with this project. But yeah, it's just like the vivid colors, the gradients you can get. There really is just something about it that you can't really replicate any other way. You can spot when it's printed another way, like the risograph looks different. So that was my introduction to Riso. Did you have one?
Yeah, I mean, mine has more just been like an enjoyer of books and print media throughout the years. I don't think I knew that what I liked was actually Riso until this year. because it, like everyone else has mentioned, has a very specific look and feel. And especially with co-running the gallery, we get a lot of work in, especially zines that are Riso printed, and just really, you know, enjoying what that looks and feels like has been my main experience with it. I'm excited to learn more, especially because I feel like it has the aspects of like shitty DIY, like Kinko's vibe, but like with really nice colors, with nice clean lines. I feel like it goes back to my roots with just like punk stuff, but like more refined.
I think I'm in a similar boat of like, I probably interacted with a lot of Riso publications via short run before I knew anything about what it was. And then I don't remember where or how I learned about it, but I distinctly remember visiting Mount Analog for like a first Thursday at some point and like trying to play it cool in the corner and like scoping out Cold Cube's Riso and trying to be like, what is this? How does this exist? What does it do? And then after that, like going to the IPRC for a Riso workshop and like coming all prepared with my like, okay, I've done screen printing. I know the basics of color separation. So I'm going to put together this whole planned thing, and then having the IPRC be like, okay, we've got like a, it was a shout out. The IPRC usually has drums working very well, but this was a bad weekend. And they had like a spotty bright red and hunter green. And I was like, oh, this is burgundy was also there. And I was like, oh man, I don't know what to do with these now. So then it just became a like experimenting day, which was even cooler. So yeah, 21 inks, Jesus Christ. I guess I'll say context for the crowd too. Theoretically, I want to do the math on this to see if it's still real. But theoretically, Riso is still like one of the most cost-effective ways of printing between like 50 and 500 copies of something. So there is that aspect of it as well. While the machines are like getting access to one, the machines themselves are expensive and require lots of maintenance and things like that. Once they're up and running, like that's real access to printing power.
But I think it's also worth saying in the same breath that the, and this I think is the fundamental reason why Austin and I haven't made the leap or the investment to, you know, get one for our own studio at this point, is that the secondary market over the past decade has really kind of like ballooned out of control, or, you know, maybe in the aughts or early 2010s, it would have been feasible to just kind of like find a machine in a basement or a church or an attic. And this is maybe no longer the case. And the parts needed to repair or make working a machine in that condition are no longer available to access. And I found it funny, I think I forgot to mention this to you the other day, Robert, that I was having a chat with Joanna Drucker, who's a publishing theorist and artist book critic, who came and visited, did a virtual talk for students in Chicago a few months ago. We had this whole chat about Riso masquerading as the common man's printing method, which I found so interesting. And I think this is kind of maybe one of the central thrusts of my asking this question, and the writing that I've done about it is, you know, like what does Riso come to signify, like on its own accord? I loved how Rain put it, that it is like refined punk, or maybe like an intersection between punk and refinement. And I'm curious, like what is, you know, what is that like quintessential Riso quality that signifies that?
So I have thoughts on this. It's really interesting. So we have GRs here in the studio, which they're finicky. We have one that's like not in service right now, and it's like so frustrating. And you know, they don't always register correctly. They're very and I see others doing Riso making really high quality stuff, like 4-layer, you know, CMYK images that like beautiful. And I'm like, can't really do that with, I mean, we can, but the quality isn't just, it's not up there. And I don't know, it's just so interesting. Like, I'm fine with that. I think for me and my practice and how I approach Riso printing is that, like, I don't try to make it perfect. And I think it's funny, it's interesting, you know, watching others work with Riso and like really trying to get it like perfect or as perfect as possible. And it's just like how some people work, you know, it's their preference and it's what they want. Me personally, I've kind of just accepted that, like, that the Riso isn't always going to give me what I want. And I just have to be okay with that and run with it. So yeah, those are like my thoughts around the whole Riso and like refined punk thing. And I don't know, for me, it's just acceptance and letting it do its thing.
I think, I don't know. I guess, okay, so one of the things that I'm excited about in Riso that is like double-edged sword is the like, and as soon as there's a visual thing that speaks a language like punk, that's like very easily co-opted, right? That becomes a major issue because you can make something feel punk, even though it shares none of the values or history or anything like that. So that's a little terrifying. At the same time, the community that's developed around it does tap into like the DIY community. So like with all these older machines that are like dead and dying, like I'm on a Riso call where we meet up every couple of weeks and just share our like horror stories. But also figure out like, oh, we found such and such manufacturer who will make this roller for us fresh. Or like, you know, we figured out how to 3D print this gear that's always breaking. So like things like that. So there is an aspect of that I really like that feels like it does carry on the lineage of sort of the small press and independent publishing movement. So yeah, I don't know, it's complicated.
Another thing, and maybe this is something that will be touched on more next week, but the publishing world itself is like, there's so much gatekeeping in there, and it can be really difficult to get into. And so that's just another, you know, a barrier. But also, like, if you have your own space or if you have access to equipment, like there are ways of like navigating around it, or I don't know, doing your own thing and sharing that with other people. Yeah, maybe again, more so next week's convo.
I just want to again give a shameless plug for Amelia at Anemone, because our experience in the past with printing has been just dealing with a lot of really cool people who don't want to share information, and working with someone who is just fully prepared to share all things and not concerned about making money off of people, just concerned with like providing a necessary resource to people, providing space and opportunity to make and distribute art, is incredible. It's really, I think, honestly, changing the game, at least in Seattle. Self-publishing is really harsh no matter where you are, but specifically in Seattle, where everything is excruciatingly expensive all of the time, it's really difficult to find someone willing to work with you without having a ton of money right away, especially with like a subscription model. We're kind of waiting for people to buy the thing before we make the thing, so that we're not going into debt trying to publish something that we believe in, which is unfortunately the case. A lot of other projects I've worked on, I've lost a significant amount of my own personal money, which is fine if you believe in something, but I'm not really in that position anymore where I want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars of my own cash into a project. And that's why Amelia is so incredible. It's because she just really makes it accessible and easy to understand and easy to learn. because this information should just be available for free to everyone. That's why the Spectralite app especially, which is a free app, is just like the most incredible thing I've ever worked with. I'm just obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with Amelia. You need to go to her workshop immediately. And that's all I'll say.
Art for everyone.
Yeah, art for everyone.
For everyone.
Also, we're, you know, being public school teacher, like it's, you know, it's just like an ethos that you carry into your practice. So
I work at private school.
well, that's fine. Being a school teacher is really important to make sure that everyone has accessibility. So that's a huge focus for us.
Okay, I'll transition that into like, okay, first shout out to the group. If there are any, like 5 minutes left, time for final questions. I have one to like finish this off, but I want to give that opportunity to everyone else first. Okay, so my final question is like, what is your wish list for the publishing scene, both in Seattle and more broadly? Like, where do you want us to see us go as a group, as a community next?
I think I would love to see more spaces like the, just like community spaces like the IPRC where you can go and use facilities, or even just like public access, I guess, risographs, since it seems like we're all really trying to screen print Xerox together. Just more openness, more community fostering. I'm also really excited that as we are exiting or starting to phase out of the pandemic, that we might return to more of a in-person atmosphere that can really excite collaboration as well.
Yeah, and I'll say spaces like the IPRC that are like especially well facilitated are important, because so often in those kind of like community lab settings, upkeep and like maintenance are just like I mean, very difficult processes to maintain, but like so often the like access and the quality of the materials you're working with are compromised because of the lack of upkeep. And to see a lab like that with the facilities and the people running it really like putting the legwork is cool to see. So more of that for sure.
I guess, Jackie, you go first.
Yeah, I definitely would like to see, you know, all of us moving towards justice and anti-racism. Like those are, you know, two just really difficult and harmful things that permeate throughout society. And you know, we can all like think about like, well, what is like my like individual role in this like fight for justice and in this like work towards a better world? And like we all have a role to play there. And you know, if you're working in publishing or in the art world, like there are ways of you know, elevating historically marginalized voices, or you know, handing off opportunities to folks who don't often like get those chances. So yeah, that's something that I'd like to see more of. I'm really grateful for the work done here at the IPRC, and that it is a lot of like everything that we do is centered around our you know, our values and like the whole like strategic planning of the organization. You know, we want to elevate voices that, you know, aren't always valued and who have, you know, important things to say. So yeah, those are my thoughts.
I remember when we were speaking earlier, Jackie, we talked about access to publishing as a very important form of access to self-authorship and like to a public, like publishing as a way of connecting people to publics, and just how important that is. So my wish is as much as like access to resources is important, like social access, like giving people the knowledge and awareness and ability that these are things that they can do and have a right to do. I think that's huge. And we'll turn it over to Jamie and Tom to finish us out for the night.
I guess, thank you all so much for participating in this. I kept getting struck that the themes that kept coming up between all of your presentations and experiences were community, collaboration, and education. And every conversation kept coming back to those three themes. And I think it's so cool to see how each of you are working in those areas, but then thinking about how they overlap and how they can connect to others working in those areas. And I think, like, for Seattle Art Book Fair, we're trying to kind of tap into that a little bit and then provide a way for people to find each other and to share with each other and to connect with each other. And hopefully this kind of online presentation is kind of a taste of that. And we're really excited to see how an in-person event could make that even better next year.
Also shout out, I totally forgot, but the panelists put together just like a quick reading list of stuff that we're reading now or thinking about now. It's a Google Doc, I just posted it. So some follow-up stuff. It's also editable for all of you panelists if you want to toss any additional things on there. It's editable for you guys, but yeah, check it out. And that's it, that's all I have.
Thanks so much, Robert. And thank you too for the audience who's stuck with this for 2 hours on a Friday night. Rain and Mimi, it looks like you've been in a perpetual sunset this entire time. It's kind of incredible. And make sure that if you're interested in all the risograph talk that we've had today, there are 2 studio visits tomorrow. First thing in the morning with Cold Cube Press, who's been name dropped a lot tonight, and they're wonderful guys, are going to be presenting at 10 a.m. And then again, at 1 p.m., Moniker Press from Vancouver is going to share their risograph experiences. And then in the middle of the day, the Division of Design at UW and Polymode Studio are both going to be presenting on more design-focused topics. And then a workshop by Hotam, also from Vancouver, is going to explore how to make your own DIY art book. And then at the end of tomorrow, Michael Ellsworth from Civilization, who you might know from the design lecture series that's been extremely popular here in Seattle, is going to be joining us for office hours. It's actually just 1 hour. And you'll have to bring your own beverage to that. So thank you all again. And we hope to see everyone tomorrow.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thanks, Robert. Thanks, Tom and Jamie.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much.
All.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. This was amazing.